So flexbox is an efficient way to style the HTML boxes. How do we introduce flexbox into our code? So you can have an HTML element, for example this div right here, with the display property of flex. Whenever you put the display property of flex on any particular HTML element, you have introduced the flexbox into your code. So this div right here has a display of flex, and it means that this div is a flex container, like so. So there are two things that happens here. When you introduce the display of flex, like so, you have introduced the flexbox, and then this div or the HTML tag that you've used this property on, display of flex, it's now a flex container. It means that it's going to contain things, right? And so those things that it will contain are known as flex items, like so. So this flex container can have this set of items, and they are seen together as flex items. Now there is one more concept we should understand about flexbox before we dive right into the code. Well, the thing is that if you notice, these items are arranged along the horizontal axis, or along the row, or horizontally, however you may like it. So when flex items are arranged horizontally like this, or along the row, it means that they are arranged along the main axis. This becomes the main axis. From the left to the right becomes the main axis. Or you can say that the horizontal plane becomes the main axis. And then the vertical plane becomes a cross axis. This set of concepts will be important when we begin to talk about CSS flexbox. So we should just know that when items are arranged from the left to the right or along the row, it means that that row is now a main axis. And then the vertical plane is called a cross axis. We're going to understand this better when we start out with our code on VS Code. So the summary here is that when you use the display of flex on any particular HTML item, you've introduced the flexbox into your CSS styling. And then whatever element it is that has this display of flex is now a flex container, like so. And the items within it will be called flex items. And then if the things are arranged along the row, it means that the row is the main axis for that particular flex container. And then the vertical plane will be called the cross axis. Now let's see in our VS Code how we can begin to use flexbox. So now in our VS Code, in the body, I'm going to introduce the section tag, and then within this section tag, I'm going to have three divs. This one will say div 1, and let's make this one div 2, and this one div 3. So when it comes to the styling, I'm going to style the section, first of all, to have a background color of bisque. And then I'm going to give it border property, 1 pixel, solid black. And then for the divs, I'm going to select all of them, right? And then I say background color of aqua. Oh, I love my aqua very much. And then I'm going to give the border properties and say 1 pixel, solid black, like so. First of all, let's save this file and preview to see what it looks like. Okay, this is what we have, right? So you can see that they are stacked on top of one another, div 1, div 2, and div 3. First of all, let me give a width attribute or property rather to this div and say 100 pixels. Let me give it a height of 100 pixels. Let me make it a square, 100 pixels, like so, and preview. Okay, this is what they look like right now. And let me also give some margin around the divs. So remember, margin is a space outside of the boxes. Margin, and let me say 9 pixels, like so. So this is what we have currently. Now, one important thing to see before I introduce the flexbox is that these items are stacked vertically. So you have the div 1, div 2, and div 3, and this is the normal way that HTML elements will be displayed. So they are displayed from top to bottom, right? Now let's do something on the section. Let's make this section a flex container. Let's introduce the flexbox. So I'm going to say display of flex, like so, and then I'm going to save. Now when I refresh, you'll see that these boxes, the divs, are going to be stacked from the left to the right, no longer from top to bottom. Let me refresh. So you can see that they now move or arranged from the left to the right. So you have the one here, div 2 and div 3. How come they are stacked like this from the left to the right. That's because of a property called flex direction. So if I come to the section and say flex direction, and remember this property go on the flex container, right? So if I come to the flex container and give a styling that says flex direction of row, nothing is going to change because this is the default. So by saying flex direction of row, we're saying let the items stack from the left to the right, that is along the row, that is along the horizontal plane. And this way it means that the row is now the main axis, like I said earlier on. But what if I come here and say something like column and save this file and refresh? You can see now they are stacked from top to bottom. So this flex direction can take on this column and the row value. And since this is the default, since row is the default, if I remove this, if I do not set it to column and remove this, it means that the flex direction will be automatically or by default set to flex direction of row. So when I refresh this, we'll be back to what we had earlier on. So this is flex direction of row, and then they're stacked from the left to the right. And remember again, since we have flex direction to be row, it means that the row is now the main axis while the vertical plane is the cross axis. So we have main axis and then we have down or cross axis. So we should bear that in mind. Now let us populate this section with more divs. Let's duplicate this particular div, the one that says div 3. We want to have as many divs as possible. So let me save this and preview on our browser. So look at what we have. Let me introduce more and save again, and then let's see. So you can see that the div, they're all stacked horizontally. They're not even coming down on the next line. And we can scroll horizontally. You can see that. So this is the default behavior of Flexbox container. They don't allow the items to come down to the next line, no matter how many or how large the content is. So they just keep going to the right along the row. So instead of coming down to the next line. So now you can see that we're scrolling horizontally just to see those other div. And this is because of a property that we set on the Flexbox container called flex wrap. So by default, this flex wrap is set to no wrap. So when I save and refresh, we'll still have the same thing because this is the default value given to flex wrap. But what if I change it to wrap and save and then refresh? You can see that they've all come down to next line. So when the div gets here, there is no longer enough space for it to continue. It comes down to the next line like so. When it gets here, it comes down to the next line like so, and so on and so forth. So this is how it is going to be doing because we have now set the flex wrap property to wrap, which means wrap when there is no longer enough space for you to contain that particular flex item. We can also have one more value for this flex wrap that says wrap reverse. So it just takes what's at the beginning and puts it at the end. That's all. Let me refresh. Now you can see we have 3, 3, and all of those divs. Then here you're going to have 1, 2, 3, and the other divs. So it just takes everything upside down. The 1, 2, 3 were at the beginning here. So now it has reversed. It reverses the positions of the div. That is why we have wrap reverse. There is another property value pair called flex flow, and it's just a combination of the flex direction and the flex wrap property. So if I come here and say flex flow like so, and then I can say row and then say wrap. When I control save, we still have the same thing, but now we have to go back to the initial arrangement we had. So 1 will come here, 2 will come here, and so on and so forth. So you can see 1, 2, 3, and then you have the remaining divs. That is because this flex flow says that the flex direction should be row and the flex wrap should wrap, not no wrap and not no reverse, or wrap reverse rather. So this is just a combination of two property, which is flex direction here and flex wrap. So remember the padding property. When we give a padding to a CSS element, the padding stands for the padding top, padding right, padding bottom, and padding left. So, but you know that we can also individually give the properties for the padding top, padding right, padding bottom, and padding left. So this is the same thing with FlexFlow. Let me even introduce a tag just after this section to demonstrate that again. So if I have an article like so, and then I'm going to say I am an article like so, and then I can give an inline style in here, let me give it a padding of 40 pixels. So when I refresh this, we'll see what we have. So down here we have an article. I am an article, and in fact, let me also give background color. Most of the time you have to give a background color to actually see the effect of what you're doing, right? So of blue, and save and refresh. So you now see that we have that article down here, and it has padding top of 40 pixels, padding right of 40 pixels, even though it's not all that obvious because this is a small content, right? But then we can see that it has padding bottom of 40 pixels and padding left of 40 pixels. If we were to remove that padding, like so, and save, we see that we'll have no spacing within this box, just like so. All right, so in that same way, in that exact same manner, flex flow stands for the combination of flex direction and flex wrap. So instead of writing these two separately, you can just give flex flow and then give the value for flex direction here and the value for flex wrap here. That is the use of the flex flow. Now let's clean up our code a bit. Let's delete the flex flow, flex wrap, and flex direction from here and have it like so, and delete the section or the article we had here. Let's delete it, we don't need it, and save and refresh. Oh, right now we still have a lot of contents, right? So let me deal with them. Let's just have 3 divs like so. Okay, let me save and refresh. So we're back to what we had earlier on. Let's see another property on the flex container that actually arranges the flex items along the main axis, that is along the row, since we have our flex direction set to row. All right, and let's come here, and in fact let me come here and say flex direction, although it's by default, but let me give that so that we can always know that we're talking about the flex direction row, or that we can actually know and remember and see that our flex direction is set to row. When I refresh, we're still not going to have any difference, right? Because this is the default, but I just want it to be there so we can see. Then right here, I'm going to say justify content to flex start, for example. So this justify content, we arrange the flex items inside of the flex container along the main axis. That is along the row, since flex direction is row, right? And so flex start says start at the beginning here. That's what it means. So when I refresh, let me save this file and then refresh. So we'll still see that we get the same thing, right? Now when I say flex end, let's see flex end and save and refresh, we see that they get pushed over to the other side. So this is the end, all right? And you see how they're moving along the row like so. Another property that it can take, which is also useful, is called center. So when I put the center and refresh, you see they're going to be on the center along the main axis, along the row. And let me put on another property or another value, space between, like so. Let me save and refresh, and now you can see there are spaces between the flex items, Now when I say flex around, I want you to notice the difference between flex around, space around and space between. For space between, you just have the spaces between the flex items. But now when I say space around, you're going to have to say spaces around the divs as well, like outside of the div. So when I refresh, you can see there are spaces here, spaces here, spaces here, and spaces here. So, but with space between, you don't have spaces to the left and spaces to the right here of the div. So that's the difference. And then we have another one called space evenly, like so. And when I save, now notice what happens. Almost like space around, but then the spaces between the flex items are even. So the space here, the space here, and the space here, and the space here are all even. That's what it means. Now that we've seen the justify content, let's see another property value pair that is called align items. So this align items arranges the flex items along the cross axis this time. So instead of moving along the row, it's going to move it along the vertical space, along the column if you like. So along the cross axis. All right, so let me set align items to flex start and refresh and see what we have. So now we have this flex start, but still it's going to look as if it's justify content flex start, but it's not the same thing. So I'm going to come to the section and let me give a height property of, let's say, 700 pixels and save so that we can actually visualize this better. So now that I've given a height of 700 pixels, we're going to say that this div, or rather this section, will be taller. All right, it will increase in height, and then so we can then start to see the positions of these flex items. Let me refresh and you can see what we have right now. So remember, we're talking about the cross axis, which is along this vertical plane like so, and align items distribute the flex items along the vertical space, along the cross axis, since we have our flex direction to roll. So flex start, we'll put it here. Now let me say flex end and save. Now you're going to see that it's going to push it vertically along this way. So let's refresh and we have it right here. So you see it's now moving along the vertical space or along the cross axis. Remember always that the cross axis and the main axis is dependent on this flex direction. So now that the flex direction is set to row, the main axis is the row and the cross axis is vertically placed or is along the vertical plane. So I just want to repeat this as much as I can so that it sinks into you and so you understand the difference. All right, good. So now align items to flex end, we'll put it here along the vertical plane. So now we can have another one, center, and save and refresh, and you can see it's at the center. So these are some of the things we can use to distribute or arrange the flex items along the cross axis. Another one you can actually have is called stretch. So align item stretch. So it's going to stretch from the top to the bottom. Right now they're not stretching all the way from top here to the bottom here, and that is because first of all we have a height on this div, right? So we're saying let the height be this 100 pixels. So let's remove this height and see and save and refresh. So you can see now it's stretching all the way from the top to the bottom. And you can see the spaces around. That is because of the margin still. So if we remove the margin and save, now they're no longer spaces. We can also do margin right for the divs and say 9 pixels, for example. Save. Now you're going to have spaces like this along the divs. All right, so margin right, we give margin right for this box, margin right for this box, and margin right here for this box. So you can see how it stretches from the top here to the bottom here. All right, so but I'm going to have back what we had earlier on so that we can continue with other stylings. I just wanted to show us that this is what stretch will look like. All right, so let me make this still margin to be 9 pixels, and then I'm still going to add the height property 100 pixels. So I'm going to save this, refresh one more time, and we're back to what we have. So now I'm going to delete the align items like so. Okay, we're back to this place, refresh. So we're back here. So these are some of the ways we can use, these are some of the stylings we can apply on the flex container to actually position the flex items within it. So we're saying the justify items that sets or distributes or arrange the flex items along the main axis. In this case, the main axis is the row. And then we've seen the align items that actually place the items along the vertical plane of the cross axis. And so we've seen some other stylings too, all right, that can apply on them. Like we have seen the flex flow, which is a shorthand for the flex direction, and the flex wrap, and so on and so forth. Now let's see some of the properties that we can actually apply on the flex items itself. Some of the special flexbox properties that apply to the flex items itself. Some of the styles, or most of the styles we've seen, actually apply to the flexbox container, in this case the section, right? So we saw justify content, we saw align items, we saw flex wrap, we saw flex flow, and so on and so forth. There is one other property that can be applied on the flex container. It's actually called align content, like so. And so what is this align content? Remember when we had a lot of divs within our flex container, and so the wrap, we made it to wrap, right? So Flexbox has a way of arranging those flex items that have multi-line. All right, so it arranges them well. So let's say, for example, that one in action. Let's introduce more divs. So let's introduce more divs like so. Control S, and when I refresh, okay, we're back to this. So we need to introduce the flex wrap, right? So let me make the flex wrap here. Flex wrap of wrap. Control S and come back here. Now we have this, right? So they're coming down to the next line. So this align content is actually used to arrange multi-line flex items. So let me, first of all, on this same section, on the container, let me make a width of about 900 pixels, like so, and refresh. Okay. And not actually a width, let's set the height. Let's make it the height. So we want to have more vertical space, right? We want to have more space down there. So I refresh, and now we have this space, right? So align content can actually be used to arrange this multi-line, is for multi-line flex items. So for example, I can save align content, flex start. And when I save and refresh, so you can see it goes at the beginning of this container. So it's used to distribute or push or arrange the flex items, the multi-line flex items. It works for the multi-line. So when you have flex wrap and the items start moving down the next line and so on and so forth, now you now have a multi-line flex item. So this align content is used to actually arrange or decide where to put those flex items that are multi-line. So flex start, now we'll put it at the beginning, all right? And so align content right now is having this flex start. So it distributed the flex items at the start of this container. What if we have flex end and save? So it's going to push all of this to the end, right? When I refresh, you can see all of them came towards here. And we can also have other values such as center, save, and then see what we have. We have it now at the center. So align content is for the multi-line flex items. So it distributes it around the flex container, all still along the vertical axis or the cross axis. All right. So I want you to pay attention to that. So always remember that there is a main axis and there is a cross axis. So the main axis is decided based on this flex direction. So if it's flex direction of row, it then means that the main axis is right here along the horizontal space. All right. And then the cross axis is now along the vertical space. Okay, now it's time for us to say some of the other properties, or some properties actually, that can be applied on the flex items itself. All of the property value pairs that have been given here have been going to this section, that is the flex container. So we're going to see the stars we can apply to the boxes, to the divs, that is to the flex items. I'm going to clear up my codes a bit, so I'm going to just remove this height of 900 pixels. And flex wrap of wrap, I think I should leave it, or let me delete it. Flex direction row, that's by default. And height for section, let me delete it, and let me delete this one. And then for this one, we're going to leave it like this. And then for the divs, I'm going to just have 3 divs like we had initially. I just added these divs for illustrative purposes to teach us what arranging the contents look like. So now we're going to start working on the flex items itself. Let me save and see what we have at the moment. So we're back to this. Okay. All right. So for the flex items, let's see one property called order. If you look here, we have div 1, div 2, and div 3. So they are just arranged just like we have them here. Div 1, div 2, div 3. What if we wanted this div 3 to move over here, to be in the position of div 1, and then have div 1 move over there? Well, we can actually come to the code, right, and delete this div 3 and move it right here. and save. So right now div3 will come over here and div1 will go over here. Let me refresh and see. So you see we have div3 here, now div1 is here and div2 is here. Let me take that back. So we have it like so. We want to move this div1 right here and move div3 to the front. All right, we don't actually have to touch the HTML codes here. We can just use that in the style. We can use the property called order to actually reorder the positions of the flexbox item. So if, for example, I want to target this first div, the div1, I can come down here. Remember, this styling applies to all of the divs, right? So I shouldn't put my styling here. Let me target the first div. So I'm going to say div nth child 1, like so. Div nth child 1, and then I'm going to say order of 1. So I just want to tell you that this order has a default value of 0 for all of the div items. So default value of 0 means that they will just be arranged naturally the way you have them in the code. The other thing to note is that the item, the flexbox item with the highest order will actually be the one to be at the last. So now that I've given this first div, the div1, an order of 1 by targeting it here, it means that it now has an order that is greater than div2 and greater than div3. And so it will now move to the position of div3, to the last position, and then that's what we're going to have. So let me save this and then refresh. So you can see that we have div1 here. Meanwhile, div2 and div3 still maintains their normal position, just that div1 has now come to the last position. So the thing to note, the way to make it easy for you is to note that the flexbox item with the highest order number will be the one to appear last. So what if we now make div2 right here to be the one that appears last? So div2 is the second child, right? So I can say div nth child 2. We want you to have an order. Okay, there is a mistake in the code. Let me delete this parenthesis, and I'm saying let the order be 2, like so. Okay, so I'm saying that this div2, I want you to have an order of 2. So now you can see that div2 will now have a higher order. All right, and so that means div2 will go to the last position. Meanwhile, the div1, which has an order of 1, will now come here, because remember, though it has an order of 1, where is the div1? Right here. Now, right now it has an order of 1. By the time we give div2 an order of 2, it means that div2 has the highest order number, so it's going to come to the last, and then we have div1 following it, and then div3 in the front. So when I refresh, oh, I didn't save this well. Okay, let me put the parentheses here and here and refresh and save and refresh, right? So now you see that div2 is here, div1 is here, and div3 is the first right now. So this is how we can change the order of the flex items. Just always remember that the div with the highest order number will be the one to be the last, followed by the one higher after that. But by default, all of the flex items have an order of 0. Now let's see another property that can go on the flex items, and for that purpose, let me delete what we have here, 2 of the divs that we have here, or let me actually comment. To comment items in HTML, we use this tag like this. We do it like this. We type the opening bracket, then with an exclamation mark and 2 dash like this, and at the end we put this one right here. So this is how you comment a block of text in HTML. Okay, so first of all, you can type out the opening bracket like so, and then exclamation mark, and add 2 hyphens like so. So you have to close the tag where you want the comment to stop, and you can say it like so. So it means that we want to comment this div2 and this div3. So comment is just making a block of code on your HTML element or your HTML page not to appear on the web page. All right, so when I save this now and refresh rather, we just have div1. So we've commented out div2 and div3. So just remember to use this like so. Okay, now we have only div1 showing Let me separate this so we can have space. Okay, and I'm going to delete this one like so. So div enchart1 is still referring to this right here. Now we have seen order. Okay, let me remove the order and let me introduce flex grow property. So the flex grow property talks about the amount of space that the flex item should actually take when there are spaces. So whether it should grow to fill in those spaces or not. By default, flex grow is set to 0, like so. Flex grow, like so. Okay, flex grow is set to 0. So when I save and refresh the browser, you see that nothing happens, right? This is the default value. 0 is the default value for flex grow. But what I change it to 1, so this is saying that, well, since there are spaces here, just grow to fill in those spaces. So when I save and refresh, you can see that this div has grown to fill in those spaces. All right, so by default it's set to 0, and when I refresh, we have it back here. So assuming I have two divs right here, let me uncomment the divs, or maybe I have these two, div2 and div3 right back here, and save. Let's refresh and see what happens. Okay, flex grow is 0, right? And I'm setting it only on the first child. So let me make it 1 and see what we have. Save and refresh. So you can see now that this div, the first child, is the only one growing to fill in spaces, right? But what if we wanted the other ones too, the div of enchart2 and div of enchart3 right here, to also grow? Well, we can just say it like this: div nth child 2, and then I can say a comma to also make it apply to div nth child 3. So this way we actually, this one is supposed to be here rather, then remove this one here. So this way we're selecting two HTML tags or elements, div2 and div3. So if you want to select two or more different HTML tags, you just use the comma after the first one, like so. You put a comma and type the other ones you want. So you want the stylings to apply to the selectors right here. So this is how you do it. So I want to say flex grow of 1. So let's refresh. So you see that now they will start to grow too. So you see they're all growing to fill in the available spaces. I'm sure looking at this, you can begin to think of websites that have this sort of arrangement where there are a block of text and all of that, and so they're just equally spaced. All right, so that is flex grow. Flex grow makes the flex items to grow, to occupy spaces. Okay, I'm going to still, in fact, let me delete the div2 and the div3 like so, and delete the stylings that we have on them and save. So we just have only div1, which grows to fill in available space. Now our flex item is growing, right? Because we have flex grow set to 1. And now if you notice, if we come to the browser and we shrink, you can see that the boxes too, or the box rather, that is the flex item I'm referring to, is also shrinking with it. That is because of a property called flex shrink, which is set to 1 by default. So when I save and refresh, would have no difference as we move this. All right, so you see that it grows. This one is growing to fit the available space, and even when I maximize my browser, you can see it grows, right? And when I shrink, that is decrease the width of the browser, is shrinking with it. That is because we have this flex shrink set to 1. We're going to return to this flex shrink later on. Now let's see another property called the flex basis. So flex basis actually gives the initial width of a flex item before flex grow or flex shrink is applied. Let me remove this first of all so that we can begin to see how flex basis works. And I'm saving and then refreshing. Okay, we have this as we had earlier on. If you notice, the width of this particular box has been set here, right? So let me remove it right here to 100 pixels, right? And save, refresh. Do you see what we have? So it means that the width now is based on the content of this particular div, which is this div1 written inside of it. When we gave width of 100 pixels, it was a bit wider because it was following that width command. We gave it to be 100 pixels. But right now that we removed the width, we are seeing that the content determines the width. The content, which is this div1 written, determines the width of this particular box. So what if we come here and give more content so that the width can spread? What if we say div1 can be used? Okay, I am good. Like so, just some random text just to have some more content within this box. So let me save this and refresh. Now you can see that the width has increased a bit. Okay, we see that the width has increased a bit. Why is that so? Because of the content that we gave. We've given more content, so the box will spread to accommodate that content. So it's no longer determined by the width that we set here before. So what Flex Basis does is that it can apply a width, sort of width, because Flex Basis works like width. It's just that it is special to Flexbox, right? So Flex Basis gives an initial width to the flex item just before it starts growing or shrinking. So now if we come here and say, let this div have a flex basis of, let's say, 50 pixels and save, or rather let's apply it directly here. Okay, this one is for the general divs that we might have. Let me apply it to the first div and paste it here and save. Now when I refresh, you see what's going to happen. Do you see that the flex basis has given this flexbox a width of 50 pixels? And you can see that the good here written here is even spilling out of the box, and that is because we gave a height, a definite height of 100 pixels. So let me remove this height also, the div, and save this and refresh. So you can see everything is contained in, right? Now flex basis 50 made this width to be 50 pixels. All right, so it just works like width, right? Just like giving the width 50 pixels. But right now we use flex basis because flex basis is specific, is a property specific to Flexbox. All right, and so now that we gave it 50 pixels to this flex basis, we have the width of 50 pixels. So you can see now that the width of this particular box, this particular flex item, is determined by flex basis, no longer the item it's contained. If I remove this flex basis once more and save, we'll see that now the width is determined by the content. Remember, it's no longer tall because we've removed the height we gave it earlier on. So that's the flex basis for you. Flex basis works like the width property, it's just that it is specific to Flexbox, right? When you're using or styling your HTML tags or elements or HTML page with Flexbox, now you can use flex basis. Flex basis works with Flexbox. All right, so that is what flex basis is for. It works like width, but it's specific for Flexbox. So now we've seen flex basis. Now let's bring this property value pairs that we've seen for a flex item together again. Let's write it out. Flex grow, and we have flex shrink first of all, and then we have flex basis, like so. So we've seen these three items. Remember, grow is for this div to actually fill the space, or the flex item to actually fill the available space. Shrink is for it to shrink when you resize the browser's windows, and flex basis gives the initial width for the flex item before it starts to grow or shrink or do all of that. Right now, if I save this and refresh, we still have the same thing, and this div, like here, is not actually filling this space because we don't have flex grow property of 1 set to it, or any value higher than 0. When it sets to 0, which is the default, it means that it's not going to grow. So even if I put 0 here, it will still remain the same. When I refresh, it's not going to grow. So 0 and 1 is like a turn on and turn off switch. So when I put 0, it means like turn off, don't grow. All right, don't grow. I'm putting it to 0, don't grow. And for shrink, the default is 1 actually, which means that it's going to shrink. But when we put 0, it means don't shrink. But the default, usually, if you don't set it, is 1. So we should take note of that. And flex basis now gives the initial width of that flex item right here. Right now, we've not given flex basis, and we can give it any value that width property can also take. So if you say 40 pixels, for example, and save and refresh, you can see that now the width is now 40 pixels. All right. So these are the 3 values, and now we can combine these 3 values together as a shorthand. Remember when we talked about padding? If you give padding like so, if we come to this div and say padding of 3 pixels, or let me give something more significant and say 10 pixels and save, it means that we'll have spacing to the top, that is padding top, spacing to the right, that is padding right, and spacing to the bottom, that is padding bottom, and spacing to the left, that is padding left. So when I refresh, we can see spaces here, spaces to the top, spaces to the right, spaces to the bottom, spaces to the left, like so, and in that order. So that is what this padding. So padding is a combination of padding top, padding right, padding bottom, padding left. So in that same way, we have a property called flex. All right. So flex can take 3 values. The first one will be for flex grow. So we can say, all right, we want you to grow, or we don't want you to grow, by putting 0, like so. And then we give a space. The next value will be for the flex shrink. So we can say 1 for it to grow, or for it to shrink rather, or 0 for it not to shrink. And then the last one can now be the value of the flex basis, which can take something like 150 pixels or any value in pixels, like so. So with this command, we are saying that this flex item should not grow, it should not shrink, and then it should have a width of 150 pixels. That is the command that we have given here. So when I refresh, you're going to say that we'll have this as 150. So this is 150 pixels. All right. What if we set this one to 1? Now we now have grow to be 1. So if I refresh, you're going to see that it will fill up the available space here, like so. We didn't refresh. Let me refresh, and let's save rather and refresh. So you can see that it has filled up the space here. And for shrinking, we didn't set it to shrink, right? We're going to talk about this shrink again, but when it's basically 1 and we save, refresh, all right? So it means that the brush should shrink. You notice this shrinking actually when you have more items, more flex items within that flex container. Right now we just have one flex item, right, within the flex container. So the effect of this shrink is not all that visible yet. We're going to see that in a jiffy. All right, now before we actually get to start saying the effect of flex shrink and how we can combine different values for the flex grow, flex shrink, and the flex basis, let's play around a bit. All right, this flex basis, let me delete this and still talk about flex basis a bit. This flex basis can take on a value of auto, which means automatic. All right, so what this is saying is that the width of this flex item should be determined automatically by the content it has. Let me refresh. Now we no longer have grow, right? So we're saying that let it be auto. Let it be determined by the content of this. So we have a large content right here, right? If we reduce it from here, if we reduce the content like so, and Ctrl S and refresh, we see that the width decreases because the content has decreased. All right, so let me undo that like so. And so auto is saying that just take the width of the content based on the content. Let the width be determined by the content. All right, and even if we remove that, we're still going to have the same thing because that is the default value. So you see that nothing is changing. All right, because the flex basis will be set to auto by default. All right, one other thing that can change it is if you now apply a width property, like if you say width property of, let's say, 100 pixels and save and refresh, you can see that the width now has become 100 pixels. The width right here, the width of this box is now 100 pixels. But usually, since we're talking about flexbox, it's better we just use the flex basis, right? Yeah, flex basis go along more with flexbox, right? So, but just to know, it works like the width property. So let me remove this. I just wanted to show us that flex basis of auto. So it means take on the width, let the width be determined by the content of the flex item itself. That is one thing we should know. So right now, let's add one more div to this. Let's add div and say I am a second div. I can spell div again. Okay. I'm going to save this and then let's refresh our browser. So we'll have a second div. And right now you can see we don't have any styling on this first chart, right? So, but we'll have a second div here, and the width of this div is also determined by its contents, because right now we don't have any styling to this second div. All right, this one is for the first div. Let me make the styling for the second div right here, so we can apply styling separately and see nth child 2, like so. So we can apply stylings for the second div here, or the second flex items, and we can apply stylings for the first flex item. So right now, this is what we have. And remember, these things, or these flex items, they're not growing to fill up the available space. Why is that so? Because there is no flex grow set on them. All right. Another thing to note is that their width is determined by their content. And of course, we've not set any height value on them. Okay. So now let's play around with some values. So let's come here, for example, and say flex. Like, so remember, flex is a shorthand for flex grow. So it's just like we're setting flex grow space, flex shrink space, and flex basis, or written more appropriately, flex basis, like so. So the values you give here represent flex grow, flex shrink, and flex basis. All right, so just have that in mind. So let's remove this and have it like so. So I can say the first div have a flex grow of 1. I want you to grow. All right, and I also want you to shrink, and I want you to have a flex basis of auto, which means that your width initially is determined by the content you have, which is what is happening right now. Okay, so let's save this, and now you're going to see that this flex item 1, the one which says div 1 can be used. Okay, I'm good. It will push down the second item like so, because now it's filling up the available space because we have flex grow of 1. Okay, so we can also decide to set 0 here and have 0 1 auto, which says do not grow, but you can shrink, and then your width should be automatically determined by your content. So when I refresh, so you see it's no longer growing. We have now what we had earlier on. So right now, let's actually have, for the first flex item, let's have a flex value of 0 0 auto. That is flex grow 0, flex shrink 0, flex basis auto. And let's have the same thing for the second flex item, like so. Okay, and save. Let's refresh. So this is what we have. And what is this saying? Why is this thing still like this? Because it is not growing, right? None of them is growing. We've told none of them to grow. And that's why we have 0 here, 0 here. Okay. The second one, we've told it not to shrink, right? And then we've said that the width should be determined automatically based on the content they have. That is why you see that this particular div is having a larger width than this second div. Okay. And in fact, let me make this second div, let me make it to have more content. I am a second div. Let me write that again. I am a second div, like so. So I've written more contents for this second div, and let me save it and refresh. Okay, so now we have I'm a second div, I'm a second div. Let's actually try to resize the browser window. So if you look at the browser's window, you can see that the box is not shrinking, right? So it's going out of this box as we shrink. You can see right here, it's going out of the box. Let me see if I can zoom in a bit somehow. Although if I zoom in a bit, it's going to make it appear even better. Okay, so you can see that the content is spilling out of this particular box All right, that is because we've not set the shrink. We've not told it to shrink. That is why it is not shrinking, and then it is leaving the box. All right. Okay, now let me make it to how it was before. So this was what we had earlier on. Let me refresh again. Okay, we had this like this earlier on. Let me see if I can. Oh no. Okay, we now have a separate window like this. Okay, now what if we come here and say for this second div, well, I want it to actually shrink. So we're setting the shrink property here. Okay, so let me save and refresh. So now you can see that even when we resize the window, you can see it's shrinking. This second box right here is shrinking. So you can see the effect of this shrink property. It's shrinking, right? Unlike before when we had it set to 0. We had it set to 0 and save again. Let me refresh. Now you can see it's spilling out of the box, and when we set that shrink property to 1 again, it shrinks again. So that is the power of flex shrink. I just wanted to make sure that you see the power of flex shrink. So that is just it. And now we can also come to this one and put flex shrink to be 1. That means we want it to also shrink. Let me save this. All right, so both of them are going to shrink. All right, and you can see they also expand when I expand the window. Right now they're not actually growing. Okay, you can see, look at the space we have here. They're not actually growing because flex grow is set to 0. What if I put 1 here and put 1 here? That is, I want them to grow. Now I'm going to refresh, save and refresh. Somehow here we're not going to see that effect of grow, okay, because the browser's window is small, but at least we can see that of shrink. Right now, to see that of grow, let me expand this so you can now see that they're growing, unlike before when they were squashed almost to the left part of the browser or of the box. Okay, so that is the power of flex grow, flex shrink, and flex basis. I hope you remember these things. Just know that flex auto is the default value given for flex basis, and 1 is the default value given for flex shrink, and 0 is the default value given for flex grow. Okay, so sometimes we actually want this flex basis to be 0. So let me make that 0, and let me make this one 0 too. So what this is saying is that there is no width computed for it. All right, so it's different from flex basis auto. Auto means determine the width based on the content. This one, there is no width set to it at all. Okay, but then since we've set grow to be 1 and grow to be 1 right here, let me also refresh here. They're going to fill up this available space, right? Because we have flex to be 1, and so that means it's going to grow to fill up the available space. So sometimes you don't want to set an initial width, okay, and you don't want it to be determined by the content either, which is auto. So you just set it to 0. You can have this kind of styling too. So what's happening here when you set the flex basis of 0 is that the width is now determined by flex grow. All right, flex grow. Because remember, flex grow will make the flex item to fill up the available space, so it looks as if it is having more width. All right. Meanwhile, the width was set to 0, so flex grow takes over. Okay. And now that we have this styling, let's actually see the proportion that flex items can actually grow to or shrink to. Here for the first chart, for these first flex items, we set the flex grow to be 1. What if we make it 2 and then leave this to be 1? Let's save and refresh. Do you see what's happening here? Initially, it was 1, and let me make that again, just so you see it clearly. When it was 1, 1, they are both having equal amounts of space, right? Because remember here is not longer flex basis of automatic, which makes the width to be determined based on the content. Right now it's 0, so we are having no width on this one, and we're having no width set on this one. And we're also saying do not assume the width based on the content, do not assume the width based on the content for both of them. Right now what happens is that the width will be determined by the flex grow property. So that is why you would have these two flex items to be of the same width. All right, but now we want this one to grow more than this one. So this one will stretch and grow more, take more available space than this one. Is a case of proportion. All right, so let me save this and refresh. Now that is why this particular div, the first child, is growing more than this one. All right, so that's what we have, like so. It will grow 2 times this one. If we set it to 3 and save, all it means is that it's going to grow 3 times more than this one. So this sort of changes in the grow property of the flex items can determine the kind of sizes they have. All right, so usually if we want them to have the same size, like sometimes we just want to fill a flex box or a flex container with flex items having the same amount of width, having equal width, we just use it like this. We make sure that the grow property is set to 1 for each of those flex items, just like we set 1 here and we set 1 here. So when I refresh this, you see that they are going to have the same amount of width. And even if I create another div right here, let me create a third div, Ctrl C, and paste it right here. So now we have a third div, right? And let me also set the child. In fact, let me target it here. So we're saying div of nth child 3 should also have this property, okay? 110, flex of 110. So when I refresh, you're going to see 3 boxes that are of the same width. All right, and then they're going to shrink and expand equally. Let me even expand my browser so you can see they're all having the same amount of width. And remember, the width initially set on them is 0. So it now means that what determines the width that they have is flex grow, because they have to grow to fill up available space. All right, so that's the trick you use. So sometimes you can see this kind of settings on a web page where you have boxes, like about 3 boxes or so, having the same amount of width or space, like so. All right, so you can achieve this with Flexbox. So now I'm sure you're beginning to see the beauty of using Flexbox to style up your boxes. It's more efficient and it's easy and simple to apply. All you need to do is just a bit of practice playing around these values, and then you're going to understand better. Okay, I'm hopeful that with this explanation you're actually catching the thing here about Flexbox. All right, especially about the grow, the shrink, and then the flex basis. Okay, now let's see one more property called align self that works on the flex items, that is the items within the flex containers. And we're talking about these boxes right here. Let me actually resize this window so that it fits in like this. Okay, and now I also want to tell us about this flex grow, flex shrink, and flex basis. I want us to know that, remember, they're growing in response to the main axis. Okay, so for example, this is flex grow, so it's going to grow from the left to the right to cover the space within there. All right, and for the flex shrink, it's also going to shrink along the row. That is, it's going to shrink from the left to the right. And for the flex basis, of course, we're talking about the width, right? And the width flows from the left to the right. That is along the horizontal plane. I'm saying this thing so that you will know and understand, because there's another way we can actually style it and then everything changes so that you don't become confused. Remember, the default flex direction set automatically on the flex container. In this case, this section is row, so it has a flex direction of row. So things happen along the main axis. All right, so the flex grow, the flex shrink, and the flex basis, they're all operating based on the main axis, which is across like this on the horizontal plane. So when you're having the box to grow, it grows horizontally. All right, and I'm going to demonstrate that also so that we'll understand better. But before then, let's talk about another property value pair that can actually go on the flex items. And right now, let me come here to the divs and give them, for the first div, let me give a height of 100 pixels, and then for this one I'm going to give a height of 100 pixels too, so that they don't just all stretch. All right, so let me refresh. Okay, now this is what we have. And then let me come to the section and give a height of about 700 pixels so that we'll have more space down there. So this is the height of 700 pixels. Now this align self works on the flex items itself. So if you come to this div of nchild1 and say align self, for example, and say flex start, do you think there's going to be any change? Let's say no, there is no change because they're all on the flex start, right? But if I say flex end, so I want this particular div, the div of the nchild1, to go flex end. Now you see it has come down here. So we can use this align self to actually position separately any of the flex items. We can use it to position them individually. Remember, we've used align items and justify content and all of that to position the flex items as a group all together. But now this align self can work on an individual flex items. All right. And for this one, for the second and the third one, we can say align self like so and say center. So I want these two divs to come to the center. You see, now they are in the center of the box. So this is what align self can help us achieve. You can have other styling to it. For example, if I give stretch, let's see if stretch is going to work for this first div right here, right? Okay, stretch was supposed to work, but because we have a width set to 100 pixels, so it will not exceed this width, it's not going to stretch down. But once we remove this height, we have a height set to 100 pixels. Okay, this is what we had before. So we have this height set to 100 pixels. So that is why it's not going to stretch. All right. But if we should remove this height, now it no longer has a definite height, and then we refresh, you can see that it has now stretched from here to here. So this is what align self can really do for us. And so we've seen the basic stylings that can go on the flex items, such as align self and such as flex. We saw this flex shorthand, right? So we have the flex grow, and we have the flex basis, and we have the flex shrink, and so on and so forth. So these are the basic stylings that we can actually apply on the flex items. Now let me clarify one more concept before we round off with this flex box. I'm going to come to the div here. Let me create a space here, right? And then let me remove the height I gave to this guys here. And then let me remove the height I gave to section, to the flex container. All right. And then let me save and refresh and see what we've got. Okay, they're back like this. Now I want to talk about a concept that has to do with absolute flex items and relative flex items. I'm going to use two divs to actually demonstrate this so that it becomes clearer. So let me remove the third div right here. Ctrl S and refresh. All right, we're back to this. We have this now. Okay, and that has to do with the initial width of the flex items. If you look over here, this is the first div, right? And so it has a flex grow of 1, flex grow of 1, flex shrink of 1, and flex basis of 0. The same thing with this second div. And right now we no longer have the third div, right? So let me delete that star or that selector. Ctrl S one more time. So but let's start with flex 1 auto and flex 1 auto like so, and save this. And what I'm doing here is that I'm saying that let the second child grow and shrink, but then let the flex basis, that is, let the width be determined automatically by the content. So the content will determine the initial width of this box right here. For this one, I'm also saying that let it grow, let it shrink, but then let the width be determined automatically by the content within them. That is what I'm saying here. So if, for example, I come to the second div and even add more text, let me copy this, Ctrl C, and let me put this down here, okay? Let me arrange them well so they look nice, like so, and paste this right here, and paste more even, and save. So let me refresh. Do you notice what we have here? Now this second flex item is having a much larger width than this one. Why is that so? Because the flex basis is set to auto, and for this one is also set to auto. That means that the content of this second div and this first div is determined by the content within them. And so originally this one, since it has a much larger content, the width will be more than this one. Let's actually make this a bit bigger, and so it will always be bigger than this one because it has a much more larger content. All right, and so this is known as relative flex items. These two boxes are known as relative flex items. So their width is determined by their content, not actually by flex itself. It's determined by their content. And if I go ahead to even make this one smaller, let me just say div1 and remove this and save, you will see that it's going to take on a smaller width even. So you can see that this one is occupying a larger width. So the width of the flex items are relative because they're determined by their content. But what if instead of saying auto, that is automatic, let's make it 0. And this one, let's make it 0. And then save. We're going to see that they will both have the same width, despite that the fact that this one has a smaller content. So this is what you call as absolute flex items. So these two are called absolute flex items because now their width is determined by this 0, and then we give 0. So their width is determined by flex itself. So it grows and grows and shrinks. All right. The width is determined by how much it can grow, how much space can be occupied. But initially, when we had auto, like so, the width is determined automatically by the content of the divs, like so. So this is an important concept for you to know too. And so like this is called relative flex items, and the other way around, when we had 0 and 0, and then having the flex grow determine the width, is called absolute flex items. Now let's demonstrate another property that can work on the flex item. It's not really peculiar to just flexbox, but it can work generally on HTML elements, and that is margin auto. Already we know what margin is. Margin is the space outside of the box, right? Let me introduce another div here. Let me make this bigger so we can quickly do that. Let me delete this. All right, I have this div like so. I think I should just make it the same content. So I'm a second div, I am a first div, like similar content. I am a first div, like so. And in fact, let's have a couple of more divs, like so. And let me say third div and fourth div, like so. So we have, I'm a first div, second div, third div, and fourth div. And I'm going to come here. Let me make some space here so we can see it all together. And let me give the first child right here. In fact, let me give them all a width of 100. Width of 100 pixels, like so that we can just demonstrate things, okay? And let me go back, minimizing it, and refresh our browser. Okay, we're back to this. Let me make it like this. In fact, let me remove this here. So some stylings are applying specifically. Let me remove this. Control S and refresh. Okay, we have this, right? I think this is okay. No need for me to add that width. All right. So now let's try something. Let's target all these divs, right? So we have the first one, second one. Let me copy this. And let me paste here the third one. This is the third div. And let me target the fourth div, and this is the fourth div, like so. All right, so I'm going to make the flex grow to be 0 and flex shrink to be 0, and then the flex basis to be auto. So that means it's going to be determined automatically by the content. And let me replicate that in the other divs or the flex items, in the other flex items, like so. This one I'm going to have it like so, and this one the same thing. Okay, so this is what we have. We basically have the same thing, right? And we're having different values for align self and all of that. Let me just remove them. We don't need them, right? We're just using them for demonstrative purposes right now. We don't need them. Let's take them away like so. So I'm going to save and refresh. Okay, this is what we have. All right. And so when I maximize this browser, you can see that they're all squashed to this part. All right. Somehow the minimized browser window makes it look as if they're all well suited or growing, but they're not. In fact, maybe I should make this smaller, a bit smaller, my VS Code window, and make this a bit larger so we can see some spacings here to the right. So right now, what are we doing? We're saying do not grow, do not shrink, and let your width be determined automatically by the content. And that's why even when you maximize, you can see that they're not growing to fill the available space, and when you try to shrink, they're not shrinking too. They're not shrinking too. All right, see, they're all exiting the main box, the box container, the flex container. All right, so, and the width is determined automatically by the content. Now, what if I put in this first child, in the first div, and say margin right auto? So I'm saying margin right for this first div right here to be auto. So let's see what happens. Do you see it pushes the remaining ones over? So what this is saying is that to the margin right, just push everything over to the other end. So even when I maximize, you see that all these ones will be here. So it has pushed everything down here. Okay. So that is what margin right of auto would do. And in fact, when you set auto, and if I come here and just make it the margin like so, and refresh, you see what we've got. So it gave the margin to the left too, and gave the margin to the right, like so. So you see there is margin here and margin here, and every other thing will be pushed down here. So that is how that margin works. And if you look on the typical browser, you can see this kind of styling. Let me change it back to margin right, because people would usually use margin left or margin right, or can you also use the margin depending on how the dim fits and what sort of stylings they want to implement. So let me refresh. So if you look at a typical header, you can see that sometimes the logo will just be around here, and then some of the other links will just go to the right. All right, sometimes you can see that the logo will be at the center and things like that. So it is this value of auto that is usually used to achieve such. All right, so when you give a margin right of auto or margin of auto in general, it pushes what you have at the left towards the other end and what you have at the right towards the other end. So that is what it does. Okay, but another thing to note is that when you use this margin auto, all right, for example, let me even make it margin, all right, so that this one can just push everything here and then have space to the left to push to the left. So it pushes to the left, pushes to the right. Okay, when you have this, it means that the justify content will no longer work. Remember, justify content is used to position the elements along the main axis, right? And the main axis is this horizontal plane. So when you start using margin of auto, it means that those property will not just work anymore. Okay, so if for example I say, maybe here I come to this div and say justify content, let's say flex start, for example, and save. Normally flex start will mean that it will start from here, right? To be from here, but when I refresh, there is no change. So once you use margin of auto, just forget about justify content. Is no longer going to work. Okay, good. Now to the last part of Flexbox that I want us to talk about is changing the flex direction. Remember, we've been using flex direction of row, okay, to demonstrate all of this. And in fact, let me delete all of the contents that we have, all of the stylings. Work with a clean slate, all right? Delete this one too. Make some space here. Delete this one too. All right, so we can have some space, all right? For the div, I'm still going to leave the background color, border, margin, padding. Okay, can leave this one like this. So now this display is of flex. Let me save and see what we have so far. Okay, we have something like this. All right, so let's have the flex direction instead of row, let's have it as column, and now we're going to have a change. Okay, when I refresh, you see instead of going from left to right, now they're going from top to bottom. So this is why I've been screaming main axis and cross axis. Now that we've set our flex direction to column, it means that our main axis is now from top to bottom, and then cross axis is now from left to right. So it means that those properties that we're applying on the main axis, they will not apply along this way. You know, initially we had flex direction of row, and then we had certain properties that we're applying on the, let me make it flex direction of row again and refresh. So those properties that we're applying on the main axis, because the main axis was along the row or along the horizontal plane. Now if we make it column, they will start applying on the vertical plane, and the vertical plane is now the main axis when you set the flex direction to be column. Okay, so it's very important to note. Now we have main axis to be vertical and the cross axis. So when you set width, for example, on the divs, let me set width, for example, or flex basis. If you remember flex basis, we said it works like the width, right? So let's make it 100 pixels. You would expect that this width will not become 100 pixels, right? No, instead it's the height that will be affected, because everything is now working vertically, because now our main axis is now the vertical plane. So when I refresh, you see that the height of this thing will change. Meanwhile, we would have thought that it's going to be the width, like from the left to the right. So let me refresh. Oh, I didn't save and refresh. So you see now the height is actually affected, not from here to here. Instead, you're having it from top to bottom. So that's one thing to note, and that applies to the other stylings that we have too. So when you talk about, let me remove this flex basis on the section, for example, on the flex container. When we talk about justify content, remember initially justify content aligns the flex items horizontally, but that was because the flex direction was row. But now that the flex direction is column, justify content will now work vertically because the main axis is now vertical. So when I say justify content to be, let's say, flex start, let's save and see what that gives us first of all. Okay, we'll not be able to see the difference very well, just because the width, or the height rather, of this section has not been given. So let me just increase the height. For example, let me make the height about 1000 pixels and save, and let me, so you can see now flex start is now here, right? So everything is now moving along the vertical plane. So this justify content or flex start is moving along the vertical plane. So when I say center and Ctrl S, you see that it will move to the center. So it's moving along the vertical plane, no longer like this. Initially it would have come like this. So let me refresh. Now you see this is the center of the container. All right, so if you want to see it again, if I make this row so that you see it clearly again and save, now that the flex direction is row, it means that the main axis is back to here. So you see that this thing will be here at the center. So let me refresh. Now you see it's at the center. Okay, so the flex direction is row, now is now from here to here. Actually it's stretching here because we gave this height to be 1000. So let me remove this height, okay, and make it like, let me say height, let me make it like maybe 500 pixels, so they don't actually stretch all the way. And let me refresh. All right, so they're actually moving along the row, actually no longer along the vertical plane. And in fact, if I should remove this height, let me remove it and see, and refresh. Okay, so they're back like so. All right, and we can even set a definite width. Let me set a definite width and height on all of the flex items. Let me make 50 pixels like so, and make the height 50 pixels and save. Okay, so now you can see that it's at the center like so. Let me again introduce the height property so we can stretch that flex box. We can make more content down. All right, so we can see how these things move. Let me make it 500 pixels and refresh. Okay, so you can see that flex direction of row and then having justified content to be center places it here. But in flex direction of column makes the items to come here along the vertical plane. So always remember this. So now is the main axis. The vertical place or the vertical plane is the main axis, and we can even change it. The align items, which usually would work on the cross axis when we had the flex direction of to be row, align items will now work on the horizontal plane. So when we say center, like so, center, so everything will come to the center now. Let me save and refresh. So you can see, so this is how you can actually center something, flex items within the box like this. All right, so now align items is center, justify content is center. So these are some of the things we can use to move our flex items around. The important thing here is actually to play around with these things, and you can listen to the lecture again and you can get the important points. Okay, and once you start coding and start typing these things out, you get a better understanding of how they work. All right, and so that brings me to the end of Flexbox. So next up, we're going to be building that e-commerce web project, and we're going to be, of course, using this Flexbox, some of the ideas we've gotten from this Flexbox to organize our codes. And it's just going to be about HTML and CSS, and we're going to do it very simple.